Welcome back to the Forensics Detailing channel. Today we are reviewing the Flex XC VRG 3401 Positive Drive Orbital Polisher. So the 3401 VRG, often referred to as a forced rotation DA. What that means, okay, is a normal DA dual action polisher, as we've explained before in other videos, has a free spinning bearing that the plate is mounted to, okay? So you can just spin up the plate with your hand on a normal dual action polisher. That bearing is offset on the main axle and that gives you the throw. So you have two forms of movement. You have the rotation of the main axle, which is offset, and the spin that's generated from that kind of force. So that's your two kind of forms of movement. The disadvantage is that the free spin that's generated from the movement of the axle is easy to kind of stop with pressure, okay? So you can stall the plate on a free spinning DA. So the 3401 has a set of cogs on each of the backing plates that you use, which interface or run around a set of cogs or a track on the inside of the shroud. So the clockwise rotation of the main axle and the offset bearing cause the plate to spin in the other direction as it runs around the track. And that's why this device spins counterclockwise. Because it's running around the track, you cannot stop the rotation, okay? You'd be working against the motor. So the important thing to say about the Flex 3401 is you get the benefits of the dual action movement where you're not working one specific area quite as aggressively and generating less friction in that area by spreading the kind of working load, if you like. So you get the advantages of a dual action, but you counteract the disadvantages of dual action, which are plate stall. So, you know, especially when you're putting more pressure on the edges or trying to polish curved areas, the disadvantage of a free spinning DA is that you can stop that rotation, and you have to be mindful of that when you're using that particular tool. Let's start with the specs, okay? So Flex advertised this as an RPM rate of 160 to 480, okay? And I think, is that revolutions per minute or rotations per minute? There's always a little bit of uncertainty with some of this data, and other people have given me really good information that the OPM rate on these machines might not be what you expect. It might, if it's oscillations per minute, it could be different orbits per minute, and it depends where they measure it. So I've lost faith in all of these things, because I'm not sure if all the manufacturers are using the same sort of specification or measuring it the same way. But anyway, let's run through the specs. So 160 to 480 RPMs, and my temptation is to compare that to like a rotary, which you kind of tend to operate on a minimum speed of around 600 RPM. So I don't know if that translates directly to that. It feels like it does. This doesn't spin as fast as a rotary, okay, or as a rotary potentially could. The next thing, OPM, which I understand to be orbits per minute, but could be oscillations per minute, which could be an increased number. But anyway, its OPM range is 3,200 to 9,600, which 9,600 again would be really, really high. So I'm wondering if that's oscillations per minute or something slightly different. Who knows? It has a 1010 watt motor. This one's spec'd out to 230 volts for the UK, which is important. It weighs 2.6 kilograms, so it's reasonably light. Has a 4 meter cable. It has some electronic features that most of the Flex tools incorporate, most of the Flex polishers. It has a speed control, you know, the tachometer that's able to maintain that speed, which is important for consistency. It has soft start, restart protection in case you have a power failure, overload monitoring, temperature monitoring, and speed selection. You know, they all tend to have that. I mentioned before it has an 8mm offset, so it's not a huge offset like some of those long throw polishers. We'll talk about why that's relevant later on. The price typically varies from about £310 through to £350. I'll put a link in the description of where you can buy the tool, and I believe it will be around, the link I'm providing, it's around £310 at the time that I shoot this video, okay, so it's a good price. Okay, quick thing on using the 3401, okay, like any machine polisher, the technique people will use with this machine will vary. I use this machine very simply with a very basic technique, and I haven't changed that technique since from the moment I've first been using it, and it's a similar technique to how I use a DA. I put my polish on the pad, I set an area that I'm going to work for that set, I lay out the product so I've got a film of it over that particular area, then I'll ramp my speed up to around about somewhere between speed 4 and 5. You know, your first set you're going to be observing to try and see if you need to maybe crank up a little bit or ease down a little bit. You very rarely ease down, usually crank up if you're not getting enough cut. And then you work that polish for around about for the duration or the working shelf life of that product that you're using, which for me is usually around 2 minutes for the compounds I favour. And then you wipe down and you inspect, okay? So it's a very simple tool to use. The first thing you will notice about it is that you need to keep the tool level, and when you don't, you will feel the tool walk you a little bit, okay? Or torque steer as it's sometimes called, because the drive on this machine is kind of forced. If you're not level on the panel and you move over slightly, you'll suddenly get all of the force on one side of the pad, which is going to be pulling you one particular way. So if it's spinning out anti-clockwise, if you lean to the right, you're going to be going that way, I think. And if you lean to the left, it's going to pull you the other way. And if you go too far forwards, it's going to go that way. And if you come too far back, it's going to go that way, okay? So the less level it is, the more you're going to get pulled around. Also, the bigger the pads are, the more you're going to get pulled around, okay? Because the outer edges of the pad, the further the way they are from the centre, the faster they're travelling. So a larger pad is going to pull you more, okay? But a basic technique with the 3401 is very simple and quite similar to using a dual action polisher. You do not have to worry too much about applying downforce, although some people will use that and do that. I don't, okay? One of the things with a fixed rotation is you're putting more energy through the pads. So if you push the pad down into the paint, the amount of energy that you're putting through the pads will increase, the amount of friction will increase, and you'll wear the pad out too quickly. And I just find it's better to work the abrasive with low pressure and work the abrasive more than try and work the abrasive harder, because all you're really doing is compressing the pad, okay, which closes down the pores, particularly on the surface. And I just find I don't get as good results. So I find it's about being patient and just letting the machine work more than trying to sort of force more kind of cut out of the system. It just doesn't tend to work for me. So that's just me. I want to run through the pros and cons of this tool. Pros: the constant speed, okay? The fact the plate will not spin down means you can get into the pits of certain curves without getting plate stall. It's more consistent because the fact that you cannot slow that plate down, and you will not get bogged down or stall of the plate. That actually makes it slightly more easy to use. You get recommended the DAs because they're safe, okay? And they are safe, but when you don't use the DA properly, if you are stalling the spin on them a lot, your results are seriously compromised, and this fixes that problem. It really does. So that's the biggest positive. So perhaps less technique even required to use this, because you can stall the plate on the DAs and not be aware you're doing it as much. You will be slowing them down a bit, even if you're not completely stalling them. With this, you don't even have to be mindful of that. If you're not level with this and you're leaning or stuff like that, the tool will let you know about it, because it will start to walk you a bit, and you'll soon automatically adjust to that and just get the feel of how to use the tool. Again, keeping it level at most times, and then when you're leaning in, you're trying to just work in pits and stuff like that, you'll be ready for it, so you kind of set up to go in there. So arguably requires a little bit less technique, or you don't need to be mindful of plate stall, like I've said. You also get less wobble from the machine than the long throw DAs, because obviously the offset on this is only 8mm, so you can feel a little bit of that DA wobble, but it's quite small, whereas the 21 throws and the 15mm throws, you can really see the tool kind of wobbling a little bit more, even though they balance them. Just trying to balance that larger offset is more difficult, so less wobble with the 3401. And the biggest advantage is in just simple, practical terms of when you use the tool. For me, and this is speculative, but from using this tool, I'd say you get a little bit more cut than the certainly the 8mm throw dual action polishers, obviously, but also than the 15mm throw long throw machines. You get a little bit more cut than you do out of those, for me, and that's one of the reasons I tend to use this machine and all the other pros that I've mentioned. The cons, as I mentioned before, getting walked by the machine is a negative, but you will soon learn to compensate for that, and using the smaller pad system from Lake Country really makes that a negligible problem in my opinion. With the 6-inch or 6.5-inch pads on there, larger pads, it's a problem, and I don't like it enough that I won't use them. The negative is that you lose time when you're on those big flat areas where they're nice and easy to polish, and you want to, if a larger pad is probably going to get you across them quicker, you lose a tiny amount of time by using a 5-inch pad as opposed to a 6.5 or something like that. The thing is, if you're going to be swapping pads and plates over, and you've got to undo the plate every time you go from the hood or the roof down to another panel, you're gonna lose that time there. So the time saving is negligible with using the 5-inch pads, and it just makes the tool so much nicer to use, in my opinion. Some other negatives: at full speed, this machine kicks out a lot of noise. Okay, noise, not vibration. This tool does not vibrate as much as the long throw DAs for me, even at speed 6. Hot whack. The vibration levels are low, and you're not going to get the old numb hands, which is kind of one criticism I have had of the new Flex XC 7-15 3-spinning DA, which I've also reviewed on this channel. At top whack, it vibrates a lot, and you get the numb hands quickly. So, I recommend you don't use it at top whack ever, because you'll get numb hands even with the padded gloves, and it's just too fast. The top speed still feels relatively smooth, but the noise level is like a jet engine, so it's quite loud, so you might want to put the goggles on. I tend to use this between 3.5 and 4.5. I usually start slower, and after I've done the first set, if I'm not getting as much cut as I want, I crank up. Very rarely do I crank down, because it's harder to know if you're going a little bit too fast, but between 3.5 and 4. And at those speeds, this tool is as smooth as anything, and the noise levels are pretty low, so you can hear the difference. So it's a pretty smooth tool. One other negative is that the shroud, the metal shroud which is rubbing against that plate, can heat up when you're using this for a long period of time over the duration of an entire day working on a car. It's important to lubricate. There's a felt ring mounted in this metal shroud which provides an interface between the plastic plate, a softer interface. Very important to lubricate that ring, no pun intended, before you use the tool, and that will reduce heat and reduce wear on the felt ring. You want to keep that felt ring in good condition. The final negative is the fact that to get the most out of the tool, in my opinion, you do need to invest in the Lake Country adapter system, which will add a cost onto the tool, but it is well worth doing it for me. I think it's enough of a factor that I probably wouldn't like the tool anywhere near as much if I had to just use it with the plates system that come with it from Flex. I said I'd also talk about the Lake Country Hybrid Power cutting pads. My favourite pads of all time, bar none. They are only available in this size in the UK, I believe, from motorgeek.co.uk. So it's the 5-inch pads with the 4-inch backing to fit the Flex 4-inch Lake Country adapter system. This all gets a little bit complicated, doesn't it? it's difficult to find any other pads that will fit this plate, and the fact that Lake Country made these pads this size, they might have even made them for this system, but it works beautifully with the Flex 3401. These pads are so dense, the foam in them is just so dense, but they just hold up for ages, these pads. This pad still looks new, and I've had it for 2 years. God knows how many cars I've done with it. It still works like a new pad, and you don't often get that. Part of the fact is I don't overpressure them, and by having 4 cutting pads there, that's a good amount to get around the car. You know, you break the car down in 4 bits, so you're not overworking the pad, which is important as well. But they don't half hold up well, these pads. Like I say, they are my favourite pads of all time. Do not, you know, I did the video on the cheap Chinese pads. Don't use those Chinese pads when you're using the Flex. You know, the main advantage is to get that nice, good level of consistent cut, you know. And by using those soft pads that I talked about, you are not going to get the level of cut. With the exception maybe of that blue one that I mentioned that was really good cut, but it's not suitable for to use with the 3401. So if you can use the 3401, I totally recommend the Lake Country Hybrid Power pads. You sometimes hear professionals saying that, you know, certain tools work better on certain formats of clear coat, like you might have hard, you know, Audi paint might be more suitable for a rotary, and then this type of machine will work better on softer clear coats. And this, you know, I've done a fair bit of this, and I have got no idea what's unsuitable on what. My general method is I tend to start off with the rotary or the 3401 and see how I get on. But I don't have any I don't have the knowledge to know that a certain machine won't function on this type of clear coat, because I probably haven't done it enough. That's getting to kind of master level, I think, to get that sort of knowledge. But the point I'm making here is that I've used a rotary before as my default tool of choice. I like using the rotary because it is smooth, okay, and you get the cut, and it's nice, and it's a smoother tool because of the lack of the offset. So once you get the hang of keeping it level and holding it light, letting the machine work, sometimes it's really enjoyable to use a rotary to correct paint, and you get fantastic results. Sometimes the rotary does not work, and it all goes south on you, and you're just not getting the cut, and you're getting a lot of clogging up of the pad, and you try and compensate for that, and then eventually you just give up. And I've had that happen to me on the rotary before. I have never gone to use the 3401 and found it's not delivered for me. It's the only one I could probably say that on. You know, that happens a lot with the DAS 6 Pro Plus, great tool, but more often than not, if I want cut, I won't be using that. So I tend to use it more for finishing or spreading product nowadays. But the 3401, never gone to use it, and had problems, and sort of said, Jesus, I'm not getting the cut I need to try a different method. It's always delivered for me, so I've got I've got a lot of respect for the tool because it's never let me down. There is no best tool, because we could go into kind of talking about access and stuff like that, where the rotary is going to win hands down, where you can use it with 1 inch and 2 inch spot pads on extension bars, and none of the other tools can compete with that. Your main problem with using, this is the smallest pad you can use on this, and the 15mm throw only support a minimum of 125mm plates. But it's less about being able to go smaller with those machines and more about the fact that the tool doesn't give you access. You're not going to get underneath your wing mirrors. You're not going to be able to get your tool into the kind of like front grille scoop areas and that. So it doesn't matter how small I could go with plates on this or with any other form of DA. It's more about access of the overall tool. And the extension bars get around that problem by allowing you to get the tool further away and just get a little pad in there. So the rotary is really the only one that can get around that problem adequately, or the specific mini tool like the Rupes hybrid the nano hybrid we reviewed on the channel. So it's less of a problem about access and stuff like that. We could go into that as a disadvantage, but you can still get at most areas of your car with this particular tool. So the 3401 is a tool, there is no best as such. They all offer you slightly different capabilities, and they all have their little advantages that I could waffle on for hours on, and I've got to resist the temptation to do so. But the 3401 never lets me down and always delivers me a sort of level of cut which I'm happy with, and I don't really feel I need to go any faster with. So 9 times out of 10 I can get most of the cut I need within 1 or 2 sets with it, and it's very easy to get that cut. I just work it very simply, as I said, let it plod along and do its thing. And I'm less noticeable of the tool kind of wobbling in the long throw, and I'm less worried about the fact that the plate is, that I could get plate stall, because it's not going to stall. So as long as you keep it balanced, give it the time to work the abrasives, you will get results with the 3401. There's not many people out there that have got a bad word to say about it. It's been around for a long time, and it's used by a lot of kind of body shops and detailing specialists up and down the country. Okay guys, thank you very much for watching. This has been a review of the Flex 3401 XC VRG. What the hell's that other bit called? Positive drive force rotation machine. You know, just call it 3401 like everyone else. Great tool, highly recommended. Link for it in the description. Thank you very much for watching. Take care.